welcome to Erictology. We're going to get into, what are we doing today? The 12 prophets?
Well, we're talking about the books of the minor prophets, and talking about, let's just say it has something to do with physics. I'll leave it as a kind of a general statement like that, and then I'll explain it in a few minutes.
Okay. Let's open with prayer then. Father, thank you for your blessings upon this teaching already, and heal the people who need to be healed and wake up those who are sleeping still, Father. We long for Israel to be united. In whose name I pray. Amen. All right, I'm going to shut off my camera and let you go. See you in an hour.
Okay, so this is session, you might say, number 11 on this particular series of dealing with prophecies to or about the 12 tribes. So as package of 12 concerns, of 12 matters, 12 perspectives, you could say, what's called the blessing of Jacob or Yaakov or Israel's statements regarding each one of his sons on his deathbed. Genesis 43. And then there was, as Moshe was about to die, Deuteronomy is last oratory delivery address, you might say, and the Song of Moses is like chapter 33, 34, or 32. Anyway, significant things regarding what did Moshe see and why did he give the 12 prophecies that he gave? And just as a recap, a little bit of things that we were talking about a few weeks ago, where according to Rolliston, Francis Rolliston, who wrote a book called Mazarot, which is about the constellations, Rolliston believes that the symbols of the constellations were actually call it the heraldry or the symbology on the banners of each one of the tribes, which is why you'll find the zodiac, put it in our terminology, Mazarot, the creatures of the constellations in the heavens on some mosaic floors of synagogues. I think there's been at least, well, I know there's at least one. I think I've seen photos of a few. A lady named Rachel Elior wrote a book, I think it was called The Third Temple, or what it's called anyway. On the cover is a picture of this mosaic with the zodiac, and it's like, why do the Hebrews, the people of Israel, why do they have this fascination with astrology? Is it just other gods? They just can't leave other gods alone? Is that what these things are in reference to? Well, according to Francis Rolliston, late 1800s era, those are the symbols on the banners of the tribes. And so what we have inherited as references of the symbols of the tribes is not necessarily accurate going all the way back to antiquity. Who's to say where this stuff came from that we've inherited as history? And is it fake history? Like there's fake news, present tense. Why wouldn't there be fake history from a long time ago? We don't know. It kind of stirs up the same question. What shape is the planet? Is it a pancake or is it a sphere? I don't know. Did the United States really put man walking on the moon, or was it all faked in a studio? I don't know. I've heard stories that people can't get past what's called the Van Allen radiation belt. They just can't do it. The radiation would fry their brains. And other people say, "Oh no, we've got stations, military stations on Mars, and different places." I don't know. I have no idea. Is there aliens, space aliens, or not? I don't know. You read Isaiah 13. We've talked about this before. And Yahuwah who is referencing what's called in one translation his proudly exulting ones who are exuberant over his grandeur. You might call them his special forces, like his SWAT team. The United States has a group of elite soldiers called SEAL team. Okay, so it's like these guys referenced in Isaiah 13 are like Yahuwah's SEAL team. Other countries might have other classifications of elite military units. It says that they're coming in to devour humans. It's like devour humans as if they're not humans. But then at the end of, I think, say 15 verses or so, it says to eliminate the sinners from the earth. Well, that's a classification of distinction different than what you'll see referenced in Daniel. I believe it's around chapter 7, where it's talking about Kadoshim Elyonin. It may be translated in some Bibles as just saints, the saints of the Most High. Kadoshim Elyonin. It misses something when you take it out of the Hebrew. So the word kadosh is translated holy. It's also referring to sacred or set apart or sanctified, sanctuary, that concept of, oh, this is holy ground. Holy ground. Who comes up with that concept? Holy ground. Is there such a thing? Well, if you look at physics, physics is a science, what we call hard science. It would be basically mathematics, chemistry, physics. So mathematics is quantity. There's one of these, there's two of those, put them together, now we have three. So mathematics is just counting on the quantity of something, not quality. Just if something's a fraction, it doesn't mean it's less of a quality. It might be a qualitative aspect. It's not complete, it's not whole. But if you're counting integers, it's just a number of them. One of these, two of those, three of those, four of those. And to think that you can then spin out of that such things as calculus and trigonometry, where you can determine how to launch a projectile of a certain weight, mass, and at a velocity, and it'll hit an exact pinpointed target. It's like all just using mathematics. Mathematics is an incredible discovery. If we say that it's a science, science is the act of discovering. Discovering what? Well, discovering how this whole universe arbitrarily, haphazardly put itself together, or it happened to appear. Well, we believe that this whole universe was very specifically, intelligently designed, masterminded by the one who refers to himself, self-referential, as Yahuwah Zavot. But the scientists who don't believe in that declaration that the creator of the heavens and the earth gave himself the name Yahuwah Zavot and declared himself with the title creator, sustainer, and possessor of the heavens and the earth and everything below and in between. He's the guy that thought it up, caused it to happen, sustains it, and he owns it. It's his personal possession. Well, so scientists who have no regard of that are basically, for example, if you go to a wrecking yard and you see an old car that's been, let's say it, whether it got in an accident or it just quit running and it's been sitting there for years, it's rusty, things have decayed. Scientists are looking at it like finding an ancient ruin and saying, Well, how was this put together? Who put this together? Well, nobody put it together. It put itself together. It just somehow elements attracted themselves to each other. Now you have bolts with nuts, and you've got pieces fit together, so you have a steering mechanism and a propeller system, drivetrain from the motor, transmission, and wheels. Why wouldn't you think somebody designed that? Well, it doesn't matter. That's a whole nother train of thought. But what I'm saying, scientists have basically determined to be so objective that all they do is look at, what are we looking at? We're going to look at what we can see and determine. And so you might look at the leaves on this tree and say, we're going to declare that color to be this thing we call green. Now, why is it green? And over the centuries, people have investigated closer and closer, and they say, oh, well, that's because of chlorophyll. Well, what is chlorophyll? Well, it's an active ingredient for a process. The process is receiving sunlight and turning it into energy, which then produces more growth of the plant. So each leaf is a little solar panel to receive energy. Well, that's a functioning system. So scientists, if they look at the mechanics of what's going on, they're just looking at the nuts and bolts. They're looking at this is attached to that, and there might be forces. So mathematics is if you add 2 plus 2, you get the quantity of 4. But then if you get into physics, you might say, well, what force is causing 2 to adhere to the other 2 to give you the net of 4? Why isn't it still 2 and 2? It's just, what's this thing that, how do they engage each other? That gets into physics. And then chemistry is to say, well, if you break down how things are built, what we're looking at we'll call matter, substance. It's composed of elements, and scientists have been able to find, 200 and something different elements. And the only difference between the elements is that this one has one more electron than the other one, and sometimes one more proton. And so you'll have a single electron, then you'll have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just one more electron, and each one has another electron. Essentially, I'm minimalizing the concept, but that's the difference in the different elements. And then you join the elements together, like 2 hydrogen atoms with 1 oxygen atom, and you could just have them sit there, and they're just hydrogen and oxygen gases. But then you force them to adhere, whether it's with heat or pressure, and you get water. H2O, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen gives you water, a compound in everything we see. Okay, so what am I talking about? We're talking about that you go back to Genesis 1, and Elohim gave a theatrical staging. He built the universe, said, let there be light, separated light from the darkness. Then on day 1, day 2, separated water from water, put a rakia, a firmament in between. Day 3, separated water from land, put plant life, at least the seeds. You could say, well, he made the whole earth sprout. Well, Genesis 2, verse 1 says that nothing had sprouted yet. And whether it meant nothing had sprouted in the garden or whether nothing had sprouted yet on the earth, it doesn't make clear. But certainly it says nothing had sprouted yet. There was no rain and there was no man to water. But there was at least plant life, which is the seed, which is the structural design, like chemistry, physics, and mathematics. There's the geometrical, there's the DNA, he built that, but what's this thing of life? What is life? Is life the same as consciousness? Well, consciousness is a different thing than life. Life is, you might say, self-propelling, self-sustaining. it's not the same as the geometrical structure or the chemical structure, the chemical interaction. And you can have, with inanimate, non-living objects, you can have physics apply, but all of a sudden you add this other thing called life. Well, if you look at the staging, the theatrical environment, what we would call space, well, then we have 3 dimensions of space. You could have, the way I understand it to be, a point, like a single dot, and between any 2 dots, you can put, this is the concept of geometric mathematics, any 2 dots right next to each other, but dots are so infinitesimally small that if you blow this up in a microscope and look real close, you could stick an infinite number of other dots between those 2 dots. Learn this stuff in 8th grade. So you can never have 2 dots so close together. It's impossible. It's just the concept of a dot, a point. Well, if one point either exists or doesn't exist, then the concept of a point is a different dimension than the concept of space. Space is this environment. How many points can you put in space? Well, an infinite number. Well, you could put an infinite number of points right next to each other. So how much space do you need? Space as a theatrical staging is kind of this concept of a dimension. A point, which is something in specific, the subject within the background, is almost like a whole different dimension. And I'm going to invent some meaning of the word dimension here for the sake of this conversation. If you put 2 points, whether they're close together or whether they're far apart, the connection between any 2 points is a straight line. Whether it's here or 1,000 miles apart, it's a straight line between any 2 points. And if you were to draw a straight line through the second point on into infinity, that would be a vector. That would be something that just, it always stays straight, unless it's on the globe, in which case it bends and wraps around, but that's a different matter. Being facetious there. But the point is, the concept that a straight line is a kind of a dimensional consideration of just, that's how the universe is built. 2 points form a straight line. And if you take another point off that line and start to drop it down or above, and then down and down, you can have a continuous curve, but it's no longer a straight line. So the fact that you can do something to the points in your mind, you can say, well, if you take a straight line, what if you spread out the line sideways? Well, that's another dimension. So a straight line is like this one dimension, spread out the line. Now you've got what's called in geometry a plane. It can't wrap, it's just perfectly flat. But then if you take that plane and you raise the whole thing up, so now you've got what's called the XYZ Cartesian coordinate, a grid pattern. So if X is a straight line here and Y is at 90 degrees, Z would be vertical, 90 degrees. That gives you a volume of space. So what's called, we have a matter which exists, is like this one-dimensional point, it exists. And then you've got this 3 dimensions of outer space, or not outer space, just space, volume. But then you've got life. Well, none of this point or space has anything to do with life. So life is like a whole different dimension. And then once the life is alive, we've got time, which is another dimension that you might say regulates a living thing. It gives it a volume, not like space. It's a different type of volume, past, present, future. So the physicists that are working at CERN, right there on the border between Switzerland and France, CERN, CERN. they had the thing up and running, and then it shut down for a while, and then I believe they got it up and running again recently. I think it was in August of 2022 here. And I just looked at a little clip. I don't pay attention a lot, but I just try to listen to a few things that somebody said about it. They've spent probably trillions of dollars, if you could put a price tag on their scientific achievements of building machinery that does something. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to, as it were, go back in time to the occasion of what they believe was the Big Bang, which is where they said they can tell there's a type of glue that holds atoms together. Well, electromagnetic. Well, I believe there's four forces that we refer to. There's gravity, there's the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and I think the other one is electromagnetics, or somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. But the point is, it's a type of glue by which everything's held together. Now, the scripture, there's a verse that says that that everything is held together by the word of Elohim. What does that matter? If the word of Elohim is holding something together, is that an object of matter that scientists can see, can find, can discover, can analyze, and can they tear it apart? Well, the ones that don't believe in Elohim know that the universe is held together, and so they, at CERN, at least some people apparently, want to try to tear apart the adhesive glue, as it were, that holds matter together. Whether you get down into the quantum physics, the micro, small, what makes an electron? Well, it's quarks, and there's this thing called a gluon. It's like, are they glued together to form? It's like, what is it that? So I was mentioning that the idea of Genesis 1, verse 2, Ruach Elohim merechefet al pnei hamayim, that's not necessarily the picture that we might illustrate that the spirit of Elohim, like a dove, hovering, floating, flying over the surface of a big ball of water. That's what it sounds like when you translate it that way. But what's really going on? And I was suggesting that within the spelling of the Hebrew words, I can see this concept of what some people say is string theory, and other people say that's just some stupid idea. It's not that at all. And it's like, well, there's a disagreement. So whatever. We're just thinking. We're just talking. We're just looking at what Yahuwah built. So a wiggling strand of massless information is string theory. Everything reduces down to a strand of massless, no mass, so there's no electrons or protons or elements or atoms or anything. And somehow this strand of information oscillates or wiggles and then combines with others to form everything we see. Okay, so if that's the case, the strand of information is the alphabet. And if that's the word of John 1:1, if that's the word, by the word of Elohim, everything is held together, well, that fits that description also. So part of this study is, how do you get in your mind, whether it's imagination or based on scripture, but nevertheless, it has to do with a bit of imagination. How do you comprehend what the alphabet is? What does that mean? How does it work? Well, yes, it's composed of 22 letters, which are pictures, 22 concepts. Well, that's like 1, 2, 3. Those are all concepts, and they're also quantity. Letters can be used as quantity, but there's more to the letters than just the picture value and the quantity value. There's a thematic value. There's a relationship value with the letters staged in the sequence order of the 22 phases, you might say. And one of these days, pretty soon, we have this poster called Meta, or it was named that before Facebook came out with their ripoff of that phrase, and so I'll probably call it the Echad poster. But anyway, maybe next week, if I remember, I'll show it to you. But it'll be ready one of these days. We'll talk about that. What that is saying, what do these letters mean from a certain perspective? What do they mean? Because there's many different perspectives you can attribute, what I mean by that. If I say the 22 letters are self-referential of Elohim, starting with the Aleph, I am or I will. Yeah, but I could say, what if the 22 letters are referential of a human's consciousness? Okay. What if I could say the 22 letters were a story of Israel or of Yeshua or the covenant? What I'm saying is, depending on the topic label that I'm going to say, oh, this is what the 22 letters are about, I can read into there and appropriate a certain value to each one of the letters. You might call them a level, like Aleph, then Bet, then Gimel, that builds one on the next to get to Tav. And it's like kind of like the cat in the hat model, Cat in the Hat, Dr. Seuss book. He pulled off his hat and there's another cat A, cat B, cat C, that whole thing. It's very similar to the way the Aleph Bet works. Well, is that accurate or is that just imagination? If you have that idea as imagination, because it seems reasonable to human intellect, even if you're somewhat crazy as far as someone else might think, or remember some person, I was talking about the Hebrew alphabet to somebody. I was actually in Jerusalem. You'd think they'd have an appreciation. One evening at Sukkot, we were talking, and this lady looks over and says, "So how much LSD did you take?" What? Are you trying to invalidate the subject matter? Why even ask a question like that? Is the subject matter pertinent and valid, or is it not? To try to punch holes in you might say, the vehicle, to degrade the vehicle, is that your excuse so that you don't have to consider the significance of the matter? My point is, if I try to look at this alphabet and say, there very certainly is and was a creator of the heavens and the earth, and he reveals himself through the Hebrew writings. He reveals himself as for identity and purpose and what he built and how he built it. So I can go back to Genesis 1 and say, look, it's talking about the design of electromagnetics and physics and the glue that holds everything together, and the fact that this alphabet is oscillating. That's all very, very real. I choose to believe it's very real stuff. And so if these scientists in CERN, to just jump ahead to that, they're saying, hey, we're trying to find what holds it all together. Well, it's got to have something to do with these alphabet letters. Apparently something that's recently happened, and this is apparently because I don't know the truth of it, is that as of August, they reactivated this collider. And what they're trying to do, they have a 17-mile circle, and they shoot out faster than the speed of light, if that's possible. That's their objective. And they run these two objects, around and smash them into each other. And by smashing them into each other, trying to get them to blow apart, and they're trying to go back to before the Big Bang and say, before everything was held together, what was it like? And if we can figure out what does hold it together, then we can manipulate it and use it and, let's say, create explosions which tear things apart. As a matter of physics, not even necessarily having to have a nuclear bomb, but just how can we manipulate the fabric of the universe? Okay, so let's just say that that's what they're doing at CERN. They're trying to figure out how the universe is held together so that they can mess with it. Well, apparently what some people are saying is that's happening is that they found this stuff called antimatter. So you've got matter, which is substance. You've got antimatter, which, let's just say, it tears things apart. And they've been able to find a number of different specimens of this, whatever that means. And just the fact that they're having this stuff available, materialized, how do you materialize antimatter? But the idea is people are having strange experiences that religious people would say, hey, that's demonic activity. People are having visions, having nightmares, their brain going crazy with hallucinations, their physical body going through events, maybe what some people would call poltergeist activity is happening around that laboratory. And somebody could say, oh, that's proof of space aliens. They're making some sort of interdimensional wormhole with other alien beings. Yeah, but what if there isn't any space aliens? Nobody knows. Oh, well, somebody could say, well, yeah, but that's a bunch of demons. Those are demonic, that's demonic activity. Whoa, wait a minute. It might just be physics. If you're messing with the fabric of the universe, the chemistry, mathematics, and the physics of the universe, and you start figuring out how to unglue or unravel, you're still dealing with physical components. So if those scientists don't believe in religious stuff, let's call it spiritual stuff, then it's somebody else's label. If they come up and say, oh, I believe in spiritual stuff, that's demons. And if somebody says, yes, but I believe in space aliens, and that's interdimensional, intergalactic wormhole, you're and it's like, oh gosh, Now there's a verse that talks about something in I forget where it is, but might be in the book of Revelation, I'm not sure. Anyway, where Elohim says something about that, let's call them the angels, let's call them fallen angels, back in the days of Noah or before Noah, left their estate and engaged humans. Now, yeah, they reproduced biologically and produced these things called Nephilim. That's what some people say. The book of Enoch, I believe it is, talks about these angels or watchers who taught humans how to make cosmetics for women and how to make military weaponry, whereby people could kill each other and do all sorts of terrible things, and that's why the flood was sent. But that those angels that left their estate were locked up in some sort of, let's just call it an underground dungeon, for lack of a better terminology. And there's some smart scientists these days who are thinking, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a jailbreak and bust those guys out of their underground dungeon? Wouldn't that be a cool trick? Or if you imagine being a kid in school, say in your 5th grade and you have a science class and the teacher says, figure out some sort of science experiment. Okay, let me see if I can take hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, join them together and produce water. How do you do that? Do you put it in a container and put a flame to it? I mean, how would you, or remember my brother made a what's called a wind tunnel, this tunnel, you put smoke and you put an airplane wing or a design of an airplane and blow air at it and try to learn how to control the flying with the shapes of the fuselage and wing and all. Well, it's just a science project. So for these scientists to say, hey, we're just humans living on the face of the earth, let's see if we can figure out how to learn how the place is held together, okay? But let's see if we can learn how to set free the fallen angels who are being held in some mysterious place, in some other dimension. And what if we can do it by building this collider device? Now, what I'm saying is, if they think they're dealing with physics, there is no fallen angels, there is no demons. That's just terminology. If you could say, well, there's a demon of destruction, it's called Abaddon in the Hebrew tongue, it's called Apollyon in the Greek tongue. Do they exist, or is it a concept? The Greeks believed in or maybe it was the Romans, believed in some guy who was named Neptune, the god of the sea. And it's like, what does that mean? Well, anything that happens in the ocean, it's his fault. It's his concern. He's running the show. And it's like, okay, whatever. Well, we don't believe that. We believe anything that happens, Yahweh's doing it. Yahuwah, the Elohim, the one and only Elohim, he's doing it. Yeah, but they don't believe in that. Is it physics? Is it chemistry? Or is it demons or space aliens? It's whatever you want it to believe. Nobody knows. Okay, why am I going on about this? I'm talking about the books of the minor prophets. That's why. I'm talking about dimensions of reality. So an interesting thing about these scientists at CERN is that, so let's call these paranormal events seem to be happening. Is it paranormal because of demons and witchcraft, sorcery? Or is it paranormal because we just don't know how to explain it, but it's just physics, chemistry? Well, apparently enough is going on that somebody says, yeah, this isn't normal as we can even begin to comprehend physics and chemistry. This is like some other living creature that we can't see messing with us. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Who sets up the boundaries? Who sets up the parameters? If there are other creatures, whether they are from some other dimension of some other galaxy of outer space, aliens, let's call them, or whether they're demonic or angelic, who establishes the boundaries? Humans can only walk so fast. Humans can only jump so high. And when we see videos of people that can run faster or jump higher, it's like, wow, that's really astounding because humans are limited. Who limits the angels and demons? It's kind of like another dimension. We don't know. We're just observing, hey, there's the veil gets torn or somehow something is allowed. What are the rules that allow a demon or an alien to engage human consciousness or human physical location? We don't know. Well, the scientists that are trying to bust open the fabric of the universe are trying to figure that out and do something. And that's why some people are really, unnerved by what's happening in CERN. My point is to believe in Yahuwah Zavot, Kana Shemayim Ve'aretz, Kufnun Hey, maker, thus possessor. Kana El Kona, Kufnun Aleph, zealous, passionately jealous and fanatical about his stuff. But yet these other scientists or people that believe in another religion or no religion, the atheist people, have no regard of Yahuwah, so they can't even put their mind there. So when they see something that they can't define, because they're trying to define it by the paradigm of what they already understand, and when something's beyond that, they just call it what? Paranormal? When Yahuwah said to Israel, you alone have I made myself known to. You alone, Israel, have I revealed myself to. You alone. No other family on the earth, but to you, Israel. What this means is that we can read the Bible stories and say, well, that's just family history. Or we can say, wait a minute, within those stories, he's explaining, you might say, these other dimensions that people who are not his people, who don't believe in him, who don't regard his words, have no access to. So what I'm suggesting is that if you look at Genesis 1, if you look at the 7-day sequence of creation, day 1, let there be light, Yehi. Yehi is the word to exist, Yod He Yod. That's like the dot, the point. It's either there or it's not there. Well, is there any theatrical staging yet. There's darkness, and he says, let there be light. That's kind of like the staging area. Day 2, so day 1 is basically like Aleph. Day 2 is basically Bet, which means other. So he separates above and below and puts a rakia. The interesting thing about the word rakia, resh kuf ayin, it means to spread or flatten by stomping or pounding. So you take like pizza dough and you smash it, and you get this thinned out, spread out thing. Or if you take a mass of metal and you pound it and hammer it and spread it out, you could get really thin and get like a foil overlay type of a material. That's the word rakia. And that's the word called heavens, which is actually Shemayim, and he has waters above and waters below. So this rakia, from the reference of above, is a foundation, it's a barrier, and from us looking up, it's this heavenly, also meaning background, where you could say, well, that's where the stars are. So if we say it's real thin, how thin? Is that thinness the curtain of the night sky with all the stars? Well, it's beyond our reference of time and space. So is it a jillion miles thick, but to him it's just this thin curtain? Or how thin is it? Is the stars we see just projected on like this, what we would call paper thin? There's no way to know it. There's no reference. Day 3, separating land from water, putting plant life. Well, no, wait a minute. We're looking at dimensions. I'm suggesting that Aleph, day 1, is the first dimension of just existence or not. Day 2 is space, which there's 3 dimensions of space. Day 3 is life as another dimension. And then day 4, where we put sun, moon, and stars, it's you might say, just like to have an object that exists and then give it a space to exist in, when you have life and you have time for it to exist in. It's the same kind of consideration. So then what happens on day 5? Well, you put fish in the sea and birds in the air. It's kind of like life forms in the sea, and that I can imagine that's like, well, that's like angels and demons, or whatever you want to call them. In the ancient days, any other entity was called the demon, and then a number of years ago, they Middle Ages or whenever it was, they said, okay, the angels are the good guys, the demons are the bad guys. But to say, well, that's a spiritual dimension. Day 5, letter Hey, a spiritual dimension. Well, all of a sudden, we're out of the league of science. So science is kind of like they just look at the first 4 days, the first 4 dimensions. And I heard one scientist say, well, they can map geometrically, they can see evidence of like 10 different dimensions. What does that mean? I haven't been able to find anybody that can tell me clearly what that means. They can find evidence of, let's say, 10 dimensions. And I heard some that even go more than that. And it's like they see the evidence of things happening that they can't explain within the realm of the first 4. Well, if angels and demons really exist, good guys and bad guys, you don't know the rules they have to play by. So that would in and of itself fall into the world of paranormal, and whether they're space aliens of some other dimension or whether they're demons or angels or whatever, they're just other living creatures beyond human sensory perception. Doesn't mean they don't exist. They certainly could exist. And if we look at like a metaphor, fish in the sea, birds in the air, that could kind of fit. And then if we say, well, what about day 6, Genesis 1? Well, that's when animals are man. That's not different than life, but that's now living on the terrestrial land. And then day 7 is this Sabbath day rest. Well, how many people regard the Sabbath day? Almost none. Why? It's just some stupid rule in some book. No, wait a minute. It's another dimension. So I'm suggesting that each one of these first 7 days represents a dimension. Why is it that witchcraft seems to work? Now, this is October 23rd, so a week or so from now, we're going to have the day of where witchcraft and sorcery and wizardry is celebrated, the Day of the Dead, Halloween. But Yahweh says have nothing to do with that. Why? because that's like the creation gone bad. And he doesn't, no, it's not the creation gone bad. Anything that works, he made it. Why does witchcraft work? Why does sorcery, wizardry, magic, why is it possible to do necromancy where you call up spirits of the dead and it seems to work? Where Yahweh says, but I'm telling you, my people Israel, have absolutely nothing to do with that. And if you do, big trouble. It's kind of like scientists at CERN trying to figure out the glue. If they don't abide by Yahuwah's rules, if Yahuwah had said, no scientist ever better figure out what holds this place together and tear it apart, or else the whole place is going bust. He didn't say that, but he did say that about witchcraft, sorcery, wizardry, magic, necromancy, have nothing, because if you do have something to do with it, the whole thing's going bust. You, your family, your nation, the whole world is going to suffer if you mess with that stuff. Well, why? Because he made it so it works, but he told us have nothing to do with it. But there's something about it that works. There's something about it that works because he made it work. That's the way this place is built. He made stuff happen, and then he tells us, do this and don't do that. Well, if you're not going to regard his instruction and you start messing with stuff because you didn't know there was an instruction, too bad for you until your family gets mangled. And then you might come back, or your own psychology gets mangled, and you might come back and say, gosh, why didn't somebody tell me there were rules, there were terms of how humans should live on the face of the earth? The whole idea that there's a Sabbath day on the day 7, that Elohim creator caused it to be kadosh, sacred, set apart, different than any other day of the week. Now, for us to say, yeah, but it could be any day, just pick one out of the 7, that's not kadosh. For us to say, well, it's what we call Saturday or what we call Sunday, we don't know. It may not be. So that's why some people regard the lunar Sabbath or some other regard. I'm just saying that's where this comes from. People are trying to find which day is the Kadosh day. Did the Creator put into the fabric of the universe some means, some mechanism by which it can be analyzed and determined scientifically which day is actually the day that he designated as Kadosh? I've heard from a couple different sources, whether or not they're legit, I couldn't tell you, but I've heard that scientists have calculated, you might say, the biological energy, the biorhythm of humans and plants and animals. And at least with humans, everything slows down on what we call Saturday, starting in the evening of Friday around sunset. Really? I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that from a couple different sources over a period of time. How do you do that analysis? Well, you check thousands of people and you have some sort of monitor on them and you see their energy levels. And if the thing just naturally dials down on what we call Saturday, that's a pretty good bet that we have the right Saturday. But we don't know we have the right Saturday for sure. It's just a pretty good bet. Other people might look at the phase of the moon and do the same sort of calculation, but as a scientist, you have to invent ways to determine that. But I'm just saying, so for a scientist who has no regard of Elohim Yahuwah as a vote being the creator, they won't regard the Sabbath day. And if there's a scientist who maybe believes in a creator who doesn't believe in the Torah, the Old Testament, the stories of the Bible, he'll also have no regard. So now he's like going off what they call half-cocked, going off, one eye blind, tie your hands behind your back and see if how you can work. It's like, why would you do that? Well, because that's what people do. They have no regard of Yahuwah. So for us to be aware of Yahuwah's vote, the Elohim of Israel, who is the Kana Shemayim Ve'eretz, maker of heaven and earth. For us to be aware that he did declare the way things work and give us his Torah, that he did build into the Hebrew alphabet exactly a map of the dimensions. So that if I can see that the day 5 being a picture of the dimensions of the angels and demons, what's day 6? Something about mankind, the consciousness of humanity, the actions of humanity being a whole different dimension than any other living creature, whether in the sea or the air or in the spiritual realm. Mankind is a whole different dimension. And day 7, for mankind to regard the Sabbath day as a union connection with Yahuwah Zavot, pulls mankind into another dimension, as different as a point, 2 points forming a line, the line forming a plane, the plane going into the volume of space. I'm saying, if you consider each one of these like a whole nother dimension, then to be aware of the dimensions is to say there's a whole nother set of rules for each dimension of how something's engaged. So if we get into say, well, if we can map these dimensions to the alphabet, day 1 is Aleph, day 2 is Bet, day 3 Gimel, day 4 is Dalet, day 5 Hey, day 6 Vav, day 7 Zion. All of a sudden you get to day 8. Well, is that the Het? It bumps into this Mishkan pattern where Het, Tet, Yod. But that, where you say the 8th, well, the number 8 in Arabic, what they call Arabic numerals, drawn as this, what we call the figure 8 vertical, but you turn that same number sideways, and that's in mathematics used as the infinity symbol. What is that? It's like, hey, this is a whole nother thing. Well, that's almost like the equivalent of starting over with 1, because if the 8 represents the infinity, Het, the kingdom of Elohim, then for any scientist or any human to not be aware of the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, it's like a fish living in the water knowing nothing of flying or knowing nothing of outer space or knowing nothing of what humans go through to live on the face of the earth, digging for potatoes. It's like, it's a fish that lives in the sea. What's it? It has nothing to engage this other. Totally foreign, a different dimension. Well, if I can say each one of the next set up of the Mishkan pattern is like another dimension and pattern it to the first 7, then Kaf Lamed, like day 2, above and below, with a rakia in between, lining up with the Torah. Instructions of what, when, where. That's just instructions. Memnun, for humans who have engaged the kingdom to take these matters to heart, kicks into like a whole different dimension, like day 3, something living, like a living plant, using physics, chemistry, mathematics, but has this spark of life to it. It's a different dimension. Life is a different dimension within the spatial environment, which has then got its own limitations of day 4, sun, moon, and stars, time. So what are the limitations based on Memnun? Bumps you into Psalmic. Like day 4, Psalmic, earthly kingdoms allowed, the wicked seem to prosper. Daniel chapter 2, time, and all of a sudden one day this ebon stone hits the feet of the statue and the statue falls. Wait a minute, let's back up. If this is a different dimension, how can the scientists determine how it works? The scientists are only dealing with the first 4 dimensions. Well, the first 3, and then they're trying to break through the 4th of time with CERN. Scientists are just dealing with what they can see. All of a sudden, there's a whole nother dimension, a few dimensions beyond what they can deal with. And then if you look at the next letter, Ayin, you realize when Yahuwah says repeatedly, numerous times, a man's way is returned upon his own head, Mishpat. Is that built into the fabric of the universe? Or is it its own dimension that Israel's made aware of? that the earthly kingdoms which are allowed, where the wicked seem to prosper, like the Psalmic of 4, yeah, there's an organized structure, a timing allowed, but each subsequent dimension overwhelms or overpowers, or you might say is allowed an influence on the previous one, but it's superseded by the next one. So if I can read this alphabetic sequence, equating the ion over the Psalmic the same way of the demons and angels of the hay over the Dalet of time. This is a 5 minutes. We have I'm trying to describe a certain frame of mind. The same way the scientists spend trillions of dollars and the smartest people of the world, international confederation, working together to try to find out how is this universe built. The study of the Hebrew alphabet is us doing the same thing, only using Yahuwah's words to conduct the study. We're not tearing apart atoms and electrons and positive and negative electromagnetic forces. We're looking at his letters, but we're trying to figure out, how did he build this place? Well, it turns out that that's basically what the Kabbalists have done over the centuries. The people that became what we would call the Illuminati, the ones that look like they've taken over the world and can do whatever they want. And it's like, they're subject to the greater dimension. What if the ion lines up with somehow demons and angels, or the who says how they can operate? I heard once, there's a guy I worked with, he said his wife was a witch. And he said, they have an understanding that they can't project a curse onto somebody, and the curse won't land unless that person has done something or is doing something whereby the curse can land. If the curse put on that person is unwarranted, then let's say that entity that they sent out, like they're the traffic cops and saying, hey, you evil spirit, you go and hassle that person, it'll come back and hassle them. They know that there's rules. Who set up the rules? Yahweh must have set up the rules, because he's the maker of heaven and earth. And when he says have nothing to do with it, we don't have anything to do with it. And I will barely even address this matter. But what I'm saying is, because certain things are surrounding us in our society in America, people have all these lawn ornaments and all these Halloween things going on. It's like, okay, well, it's kind of an issue. But here's the thing. He said a man's way is returned on his own head. And if the realm of demons and angels are allowed to engage humanity to some extent, if we open the door, how do we open the door? How do we close the door? He gave that information to Israel in his word. And if Israel will regard what he said, well, then we can close the door or open the door. And if we don't regard what he said, then we're going to open the door by doing stupid things like idolatry and witchcraft and sorcery and go, oh, what's this happening? Well, it's cause and effect. The benefit of what Yahweh said in his scripture to Israel is that the next letter Pei after the ayin is mouth. Elohim spoke the words to his people to give them ayin understanding, so that we could, like the letter Samech, like the menorah, do justly, do the right thing, and all the powers, whether they're space aliens or demons or angels, will stay in their order, because Israel is doing what it was supposed to do, which is a picture of the letter Zadi, the next one, which is to say, like in the alphabet song, Zadi stands alone, though all Israel shall become. Yeshua coming out of the grave, Aaron's rod that budded. For Israel to be the only one, the only family group, the only consciousness that can stand there not overwhelmed by any other force, means we have to have the mind that Yahweh gave us, which is what he's talking about in these books of the minor prophets, which we'll address in part 2 coming right up.